why milk might be the ultimate anti-inflammatory food. For years, you've heard that dairy is the enemy of inflammation. You've cut it out, you've switched to alternatives, and maybe you've even seen some results. But what if I told you that in your quest to feel better, you might have tossed out one of the most powerful anti-inflammatory foods you can find? Groundbreaking research is flipping the entire conversation about dairy on its head. And what I'm about to share could completely change how you see that glass of milk. We're going to look at the real science, dismantle the myths, and uncover the truths that's been buried under years of marketing and misinformation. The answer isn't to just ditch dairy, it's to understand it. Stick with me, because we're not just talking about a food group, we're talking about a fundamental shift in how we approach inflammation in our health. The common enemy, how dairy became the bad guy. It feels like dairy is the villain in every health story, doesn't it? It's the first thing wellness influencers tell you to cut. Got acne? Ditch dairy? Feeling bloated? Ditch dairy. Joint pain, brain fog, autoimmune issues. The advice is almost always the same. Dairy is the problem. It's become this dietary bogeyman, a simple answer to a whole web of complex health issues. And that message has been wildly effective. The non-dairy milk industry has exploded into a multi-billion-dollar giant, with aisles overflowing with oat almond, soy, and even pea milks. So, how did we get here? How did a food that has been a staple for thousands of years suddenly become public enemy number one in the war on inflammation? The narrative is sticky because it feels right. The logic usually goes something like this. A lot of people feel better when they stop drinking milk. They report less bloating, clearer skin, and fewer digestive problems. The conclusion: milk must be inflammatory for everybody. This personal experience, blasted across social media, has created a massive echo chamber. When you see thousands of people online sharing their dairy-free wins, it's easy to assume it's a universal truth. On top EAF. Now, the case against dairy is often dressed up in scientific-sounding language. We hear about lactose intolerance, casein sensitivity, and saturated fat. Each of these has been painted as a trigger for inflammation. Lactose, a sugar in milk, can be tough for a huge portion of the population to digest, leading to gas and bloating. Casein, the main protein, has been linked to digestive issues and immune responses in certain people, and for decades, we've been told that saturated fat is a one-way ticket to inflammation. When you wrap all that together, personal stories, a huge marketing push for plant-based milks, and a few bits of science taken out of context, you get a really convincing story. It's the story of a modern food our bodies just can't handle anymore. The only problem with this story is that it's a massive it lumps all dairy together, from a sugary, highly processed yogurt to a glass of raw, grass-fed milk. It doesn't distinguish between different milk proteins, different farming practices, and most importantly, it ignores a huge and growing body of high-quality scientific evidence that tells a completely different story. A story that suggests, for most people, dairy isn't the inflammatory devil it's made out to be. In fact, it might be the exact opposite. The groundbreaking reveal, the scientific plot twist, for all the noise and fear, when you actually pull back the curtain and look at the best scientific evidence we have, the picture changes completely. We're not talking about one or two oddball studies here. We're talking about large-scale systematic reviews and meta-analyses. These are gold standard of clinical research. For instance, a major 2019 systematic review published in the journal Advances in Nutrition compiled data from numerous randomized controlled trials looking directly at how dairy affects inflammatory biomarkers in the body. The people in these studies weren't just healthy adults. They included individuals who were overweight or had metabolic issues, exactly the people you know. Expect to have a bad reaction if dairy were truly inflammatory. So, what did they find? The conclusion was stunningly clear. Consuming milk and dairy did not show a pro-inflammatory effect. But here's where it gets really interesting. The majority of these high-quality human trials didn't just show a neutral effect. They actually documented a significant anti-inflammatory effect. Let that sink in. In most of these studies, people who consumed dairy products saw a reduction in their inflammatory markers. This wasn't a one-off finding. Another huge review from 2017, published in Critical Reviews in Food Science and Nutrition, analyzed data from over 50 clinical trials. Their quantitative analysis pointed to a clear anti-inflammatory activity associated with dairy consumption in humans. What's more, this anti-inflammatory effect seemed to be particularly strong in people with metabolic disorders. This flies in the face of the common advice that people who are overweight should be the first to cut out dairy. The science suggests they might be the ones who benefit the most from its anti-inflammatory properties. The only group that consistently showed a pro-inflammatory response was, as you'd guess, people with a diagnosed allergy to cow's milk, a true allergy, which is very different from an intolerance. So, we have this massive disconnect. On one hand, a cultural story of inflammation. On the other, a mountain of clinical evidence showing a neutral or even helpful effect. How is that possible? The answer is, in the biology of milk itself, and it's time we bring its ignored anti-inflammatory components into the light. The why? A deep dive into dairy's anti-inflammatory power. To understand why these huge studies are finding an anti-inflammatory effect, we need to break milk down. First, what are scientists even measuring? They look for specific biomarkers in your blood that signal inflammation, like C-reactive protein CRP, interleukin-6, IL-6, and TN. When these are high, it's a sign of chronic, body-wide inflammation. An anti-inflammatory diet helps keep these markers low. As we've just seen, dairy seems to do exactly that for most people. So, let's figure out why. The saturated fat paradox. The first suspect in the anti-dairy lineup is always saturated fat. The assumption has been that dairy fat clogs arteries and fuels inflammation, but the science around dairy fat is revealing a much more fascinating reality. Remember that review of over 50 clinical trials? They made a point to compare low-fat and high-fat. They concluded that both were associated with anti-inflammatory activity. This suggests there's something special about the fat in milk. It just doesn't behave like other saturated fats in the body. A key reason might be its packaging. The fat in milk is held inside something called the milk fat globule membrane, or MFGM. Think of it as a biological suitcase carrying the fat. And this suitcase is covered in all sorts of bioactive goodies. Emerging research is showing this membrane itself has powerful antibacterial and anti-inflammatory qualities. Some studies suggest the MFGM could be a powerful tool for reducing both chronic and acute inflammation. So while we've been demonizing the fat inside the globule, we've completely missed the potent anti-inflammatory properties of the membrane surrounding it. The protein picture, casein and whey. Next up are milk's proteins, casein and whey. Casein in particular gets a bad rap for being inflammatory. The scientific reviews are blunt about this. The evidence shows dairy foods have neutral or beneficial effects on inflammatory markers like CRP, as one review plainly stated. Lactose does not cause inflammation, even in people with lactose intolerance. This is a critical distinction. You could be lactose intolerant and get an upset stomach from milk without it raising your systemic inflammation. This is why many people with lactose intolerance can still enjoy fermented dairy like yogurt and keep where the lactose has already been eaten up by bacteria. When you put it all together, the case against dairy as an inherently inflammatory food starts to look pretty shaky. The real story isn't about avoiding dairy. It's about choosing the right kind. And nowhere is that more obvious than when we look at the power of fermentation. The fermentation factor. The probiotic powerhouse. If the evidence for regular dairy is already surprisingly good, the evidence for fermented dairy is flat-out spectacular across the board. Studies consistently show that products like yogurt, And certain cheeses have even stronger anti-inflammatory effects. This is where milk transforms from a food into a gut-modulating powerhouse. The magic is in the fermentation. Beneficial bacteria, or probiotics, eat the lactose in milk and turn it into lactic acid. But they do so much more than that. This process creates a flood of new, bioactive compounds that weren't there before. A healthy, diverse microbiome is a cornerstone of a healthy immune system. By adding these good bugs, you help strengthen your gut lining and calm down the immune responses that lead to inflammation. Second, fermentation pre-digests the milk. The bacteria eat up most of the lactose, which is why many people with lactose intolerance can drink kefir with no problems. This breaks the cycle of digestive upset that people often mistake for inflammation. Third, fermentation creates new bioactive compounds with powerful anti-inflammatory effects. Addressing the buts, nuance, and individual variability. This is where we have to get specific. Because a blanket statement, dairy is fine, isn't the whole story. The reason so many people have bad experiences with dairy, while the science shows a positive effect, can be explained by a few key factors. The truth is, not all milk is created equal. The Aung Vise 2 casein story. This is probably one of the most important distinctions in the dairy world. As we said, casein is the main protein in milk, but there are different genetic types. Originally, all cows produced milk with only the eta form of beta. Thousands of years ago, a genetic mutation occurred in some European herds, leading to a new variant, a 1 beta. Today, most conventional milk from Holstein cows is a mix of a 1 and a 2. Why does this matter? It comes down to how it's digested. During digestion, the A1 protein can release a peptide fragment called beta-casomorphin menusechi, or BCM7. Research suggests BCM7 might be the hidden culprit behind many dairy-related issues. Some studies have linked BCM7 to slower digestion and an increase in gut inflammation. One compelling theory is that for some people, the symptoms they think are from lactose intolerance are actually from an inflammatory reaction to the A1 protein. While the science on BCM7 is still developing, it provides a strong biological explanation for why someone might feel awful after drinking conventional milk but be perfectly fine with milk from attunely breeds like Guernsey and Jersey cows, or from goat and sheep milk, which are naturally A2. Conventional versus grass-fed milk. The next layer is what the cows are eating. Most conventional dairy comes from cows fed a diet of grain, corn, and soy, instead of their natural diet of grass. This completely changes the nutritional makeup of the milk, especially its fats. A key factor in inflammation is the balance between omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. A diet high in omega-6s is pro-inflammatory. A grain-based diet makes milk much higher in omega-6 south. Breastfeeding, on the other hand, dramatically shifts this ratio in a healthier, anti-inflammatory direction. The research is very clear on this. Studies have found that milk from 100% grass-fed cows has significantly more omega-3 south than conventional milk. This results in an almost perfect 1-to-1 balance of omega-6 to omega-3 south in grass-fed milk. A huge improvement over the much more inflammatory ratio found in conventional milk. Grass-fed milk is also much higher in another beneficial fat called CLA-conjugated linoleic acid, which has its own anti-inflammatory properties. Raw versus pasteurized milk. Finally, the most controversial topic, raw versus pasteurized milk. Pasteurization is heating milk to kill harmful bacteria. It undoubtedly made the industrial milk supply safer, but the process has downsides. High-heat pasteurization doesn't just kill bad bacteria, it also destroys beneficial components. It can damage fragile whey proteins and wipe out the milk's natural probiotics and enzymes. Proponents of raw milk argue these components are key to its health benefits. Some observational studies have even suggested a link between drinking raw farm milk in childhood and lower rates of asthma and allergies, theorizing that the components in raw milk help educate the immune system. Now, it's absolutely critical to say that raw milk comes with real risks. If not produced under the strictest hygienic standards, it can carry dangerous pathogens. The point here isn't to recommend raw milk for everyone, but to understand that processing matters. Opting for low-temperature, pasteurized, non-homogenized milk can be a step toward a less processed, more biologically intact product. When you put these three factors together, un visa dois, grass-fed versus grain-fed, and raw versus pasteurized, the picture is crystal clear. The person drinking a glass of conventional, pasteurized, A1 milk is having a completely different biological experience than the person drinking raw, grass-fed A2 milk. It's not just milk, the source and the processing are everything. Section 6, the practical how-to, reintroducing dairy intelligently. So, how do you apply all this to your own life? The key is a careful, structured Don't just chug a gallon of conventional milk after years of avoiding it. That's a recipe for disaster. We need a smarter approach. Step 1. The clean slate. First, you need a stable baseline. Go 100% dairy-free for at least 3 to 4 weeks. This lets any lingering issues clear up. During this time, eat clean, whole foods, so you can be sure that any symptoms that pop up later are from the dairy. Keep a journal. Note your energy, digestion, skin, joints, and mood. This is your before picture. Step 2. The hierarchy of reintroduction. Don't start with just any milk. If fermented went well, you can now try non-fermented A to dairy. This could be a small glass of grass-fed A to milk or some goat, sheep, or A to cow's cheese. This is a step up, as the proteins and sugars are more intact. Again, start small and monitor yourself for several days. Tier 4, high quality, grass-fed, A1, A2, dairy. This is the final test. Equality, organic. Grass-fed milk or cheese that isn't certified at 2, meaning it's a mix of a 1 and a 2 proteins. If you tolerate this well, it's a good sign. The A1 protein isn't a major issue for you, especially when it comes from a high-quality source. Step 3. Listen to your body. Your journal is your most important tool. Be honest. If you have a clear negative reaction bloating, breakouts, joint pain stop, go back to being dairy-free until you feel better. Then either try again with a lower tier food or decide that type of dairy isn't for you. This structured approach takes out the guesswork. You're no longer asking, is dairy bad for me? You're asking a much smarter question. Which types of dairy, if any, are good for my body? We started by challenging a huge nutritional dogma, that dairy is inflammatory. We've seen how that myth was built on oversimplification and a failure to see the difference between industrial products and high-quality dairy. We uncover the reasons why: the protective milk fat globule membrane, the healthy fats in grass-fed milk, and the incredible power unlocked through fermentation. Most importantly, we've brought nuance back to the conversation. We know now the real question isn't too dairy or not too dairy. Now, it's absolutely critical to say that raw milk comes with real risks. If not produced under the strictest hygienic standards, it can carry dangerous pathogens. The point here isn't to recommend raw milk for everyone, but to understand that processing matters. Opting for a low-temperature pasteurized, non-homogenized milk can be a step toward a less processed, more biologically intact product. When you put these three factors together, A1 versus A2, grass-fed versus grain-fed, and raw versus pasteurized picture is crystal clear. The person drinking a glass of conventional pasteurized A1 milk is having a completely different biological experience than the person drinking raw, grass-fed A2 milk. It's not just milk. The source and the processing are everything. Section 6, the practical how-to. Reintroducing dairy intelligently. So, how do you apply all this to your own life? The key is a careful, structured Don't just chug a gallon of conventional milk after years of avoiding it. That's a recipe for disaster. We need a smarter approach. Step 1, the clean slate first. You need a stable baseline. Go 100% dairy-free for at least 3 to 4 weeks. This lets any lingering issues clear up. During this time, eat clean, whole foods, so you can be sure that any symptoms that pop up later are from the dairy. Keep a journal. Note your energy, digestion, skin, joints, and mood. This is your before picture. Step 2. The hierarchy of reintroduction. Don't start with just any milk. You want to reintroduce dairy in a strategic order, starting with what's most likely to be Tier 1. Grass-fed ghee. Ghee is just clarified butter, meaning the lactose and casein are almost entirely gone. It's pure milk fat and is extremely well. Start with 1 teaspoon of grass-fed ghee a day for 3 days. Cook with it or melt it on veggies. If you have no bad reactions, you're good to move on. Tier 2, fermented, grass-fed, A2 dairy. This is the superstar category. Try plain, unsweetened kefir or yogurt from grass-fed goat, sheep, or certified A2 milk. Fermentation breaks down the tricky parts, and the A2 protein avoids the BCM7 issue. Start with a small amount, maybe a quarter cup each day for 3 to 5 days. Watch your journal closely. Do you feel bloated? Or do you feel great? If all is well, you've found a winner. Many people stop here and are perfectly happy. Tier 3, grass-fed A, 2 milk or cheese. If fermented went well, you can now try non-fermented A to dairy. This could be a small glass of grass-fed, a 2 milk, or some goat, sheep, or a 2 cows cheese. This is a step up, as the proteins and sugars are more intact. Again, start small and monitor yourself for several days. Tier 4, high quality, grass-fed, a 1, a 2 dairy. This is the final test. High quality, organic, grass-fed milk or cheese that isn't certified A2, meaning it's a mix of a 1 and a 2 proteins. If you tolerate this well, it's a good sign. The A1 protein isn't a major issue for you, especially when it comes from a high-quality source. Step 3. Listen to your body. Your journal is your most important tool. Be honest. If you have a clear negative reaction, bloating, breakouts, joint pains, go back to being dairy-free until you feel better. then either try again with a lower tier food or decide that type of dairy isn't for you. This structured approach takes out the guesswork. You're no longer asking, is dairy bad for me? You're asking a much smarter question. Which types of dairy, if any, are good for my body? We started by challenging a huge nutritional dogma that dairy is inflammatory. We've seen how that myth was built on oversimplification and a failure to see the difference between industrial products and high-quality dairy. Then, we looked at the best science available, which consistently points toward dairy having a neutral or even powerful anti-inflammatory effect. We uncovered the reasons why: the protective milk fat globule membrane, the healthy fats in grass-fed milk, and the incredible power unlocked through fermentation. Most importantly, we've brought nuance back to the conversation. We know now the real question isn't to dairy or not to dairy. The real question is which dairy. The cow's genetics A1 versus A2, its diet grass-fed versus grain-fed, and the milk's processing all matter immensely. The ultimate message here is one of empowerment. You don't have to be a victim of confusing nutrition advice. You now have the tools to run your own experiments and figure out what truly works for your body. For many people, reintroducing the right kind of dairy might be a profoundly positive step away to actively lower inflammation, support gut health, and reclaim a delicious and ancient food. What's your experience with dairy been like? Have you ever tried to distinguish between a 1 and a 2, or grass-fed and conventional? I'd love to hear your story. Leave a comment below. Sharing our experiences is how we all learn. And if this challenged what you thought you knew about milk, please hit that like button and be sure to subscribe so you do I need. Miss our next deep dive into the myths and truths of modern nutrition. It's time to stop guessing and start knowing.